The automatic doors of St. Mary's Hospital emergency room hissed open at 3:17 in the morning, letting in a rush of cold October air and a desperate father carrying his unconscious 8-year-old daughter. Marcus Johnson, 42 years old and wearing a faded grey hoodie, stumbled through the entrance with Sophie limp in his arms, her small body burning with fever and trembling with convulsions that had started 20 minutes ago in their modest apartment. "Help! Please, somebody help my daughter!" Marcus's voice cracked as he approached the reception desk, where a young nurse looked up from her computer screen with practiced efficiency that quickly turned to something else entirely when she saw the man standing before her. The nurse, a woman in her 20s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, glanced at Marcus's worn jeans, his scuffed sneakers, and the way his dark skin glistened with sweat from running 6 blocks because he couldn't afford a taxi. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly as she reached for the phone. "Dr. Sterling to reception. Dr. Sterling to reception, please." Within moments, Dr. Richard Sterling emerged from behind the swinging doors that led to the treatment area. At 55 years old, Sterling carried himself with the kind of authority that came from 15 years as head of emergency medicine at one of the city's most prestigious hospitals. His silver hair was perfectly combed despite the late hour, and his white coat was pristine, unmarked by the messy realities of saving lives. Sterling's pale blue eyes took in the scene before him with a single dismissive glance. He saw a black man in shabby clothes holding a child, and his mind immediately categorized the situation according to his own deeply held prejudices. "This isn't the place for people like you," Sterling said, his voice cold and clinical. "The charity hospital is 3 blocks down. They handle cases like this." Marcus felt his world tilting. Sophie's breathing was becoming more labored, her small chest rising and falling with frightening irregularity. "Please, sir, my daughter needs emergency care. She's having seizures, and her fever is 104 degrees. "Do you have insurance?" Sterling asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer and had no intention of helping regardless. "I can pay whatever it costs," Marcus pleaded, shifting Sophie's weight in his arms. "Please, just look at her. She's just a little girl." Sterling's lip curled slightly. "Sir, this is a private medical facility. We're not a charity ward, and we don't provide free services to people who can't afford proper health care. I suggest you take your daughter to the public hospital where they handle your type of situation." The words hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt something break inside his chest, not just from the rejection, but from the casual cruelty in Sterling's voice, the way he said, "your type," as if Marcus and his daughter were somehow less deserving of medical care because of the color of their skin. With shaking hands, Marcus reached inside his hoodie and pulled out a small gold necklace. The pendant caught the harsh fluorescent light of the emergency room, revealing an engraved angel and the words, "For Sophie's future," in delicate script. His wife Amelia's necklace, the last gift she had given him before cancer took her 2 years ago. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice breaking. I've failed our little girl." A single tear fell from his eye onto the small golden pendant as he clutched it tightly, then carefully placed it around Sophie's neck over her hospital gown. The people watching saw only a desperate father holding a piece of jewelry. But none of them could have imagined that this simple necklace represented a power that could change everything about St. Mary's Hospital. Marcus Johnson lived his life as 2 different people, though only one of them was visible to the world. The man that Dr. Sterling and everyone else at the hospital saw was exactly what they expected, a struggling black father in second-hand clothes, apparently unemployed, probably unable to afford the medical care his daughter needed. This was the Marcus who rode the bus every morning with Sophie to her elementary school, who shopped for groceries with carefully counted bills, who lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood where nobody knew his real name, appeared on the Forbes list of most successful entrepreneurs under 50. The other Marcus Johnson was the CEO and founder of Johnson Holdings, a real estate development company that owned properties in 12 states and employed over 3,000 people. He had built his empire from absolutely nothing, starting with a single foreclosed property he bought with money earned from working 3 jobs during his Harvard MBA program. But success had never changed the fundamental truth about his life. In America, a black man was judged first by the color of his skin, and everything else came second. 2 years ago, when Amelia was dying of ovarian cancer in this very same hospital, she had made him promise something that haunted him every single day. "Marcus," she had whispered, her beautiful face gaunt from chemotherapy, but her eyes still blazing with the fierce intelligence that had made him fall in love with her. "When I'm gone, don't let anyone hurt Sophie because of who we are. Teach her to stand up for herself and for others who can't stand up alone." The gold necklace now hanging around Sophie's neck had been Amelia's most treasured possession, passed down from her grandmother who had been born into slavery but died a free woman. The pendant bore the image of a guardian angel, and Amelia had believed with absolute certainty that it would protect their daughter when she could no longer do so herself. Marcus lived simply by choice, not necessity. He drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic instead of the Mercedes that sat in his reserved parking space at the Johnson Holdings headquarters. He shopped at discount stores and wore clothes that had seen better years because he wanted Sophie to grow up understanding the value of money and the importance of humility. But most of all, he wanted to experience the world as it really was for people who looked like him and his daughter. His philosophy was simple. Money and power meant nothing if they came at the cost of losing touch with your own humanity. "The measure of a man isn't in his bank account," he often told Sophie, echoing words his own father had spoken before dying in a construction accident when Marcus was 12. "It's in how he treats people who can't do anything for him." Every morning, Marcus would stand in front of the bathroom mirror in their small apartment and make the same choice: be the CEO, who commanded respect through wealth and position, or be the ordinary father who understood exactly how the world treated people like him when money and power weren't part of the equation. Most days, he chose to be ordinary. Today, that choice might cost him his daughter's life. The apartment where Marcus and Sophie lived told the story of a man who valued love over luxury. Family photos covered every surface. Marcus and Amelia on their wedding day, Sophie taking her first steps, family vacations to places they could have afforded to visit in private jets, but chose to explore by car instead. In the center of the mantelpiece sat Amelia's medical degree from Johns Hopkins, earned while working full-time as a nurse to support Marcus through business school. Rosa Martinez, 70 years old and tougher than leather, had been Marcus's housekeeper and Sophie's caregiver since Amelia's death. But Rosa was much more than an employee. She was the grandmother Sophie had never known, the wise woman who had held Marcus together during the darkest period of his life, and the only person outside of his lawyers and accountants who knew the full truth about his identity. "Mijo," Rosa would tell him when he came home exhausted from pretending to be someone he wasn't. "You're Amelia. She knew what this world would do to you and that beautiful baby. That's why she made you promise to fight. Not with money, Marcus. With truth." The truth was that Marcus Johnson had spent his entire adult life walking between two worlds, the one where his success commanded automatic respect, and the one where his skin color made him automatically suspect. Tonight, in the fluorescent hell of St. Mary's emergency room, those two worlds were about to collide in a way that would change everything for everyone involved. As Marcus stood outside the hospital, holding his sick daughter and feeling the weight of Amelia's necklace against her chest, he made a decision that would honor the promise he had made to his dying wife. He was going to stop hiding. He was going to stop pretending that living humbly would somehow protect his family from the hatred that people like Dr. Sterling carried in their hearts. And he was going to make sure that no other child would ever be turned away from this hospital because of the color of their skin. Marcus carried Sophie's limp form through the cold night air toward the charity hospital 3 blocks away, each step feeling like a small death. Her breathing had become so shallow that he had to keep checking to make sure she was still alive. The weight of Amelia's necklace around Sophie's neck seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, as if his wife's spirit was trying to tell him something he wasn't ready to hear. The Municipal Medical Center was exactly what Dr. Sterling had expected it to be: understaffed, overcrowded, and filled with the kind of people that men like Sterling believed deserved second-rate care. Marcus waited for 47 minutes in a plastic chair that had been repaired with duct tape, watching his daughter's condition worsen while exhausted medical residents moved through the waiting room like zombies. When Dr. Maria Santos finally examined Sophie, her face went pale. "Sir, your daughter has signs of severe sepsis. Her blood pressure is dropping, and I'm seeing early organ involvement. She needs to be transferred immediately to a facility with a pediatric intensive care unit and specialized equipment." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer would break his heart. "It means she needs to go back to St. Mary's Hospital. They have the only pediatric ICU in the area, and they have specialists who can save her life. But—" Dr. Santos hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, I have to be honest with you. Without insurance or a significant cash deposit, they're going to refuse treatment. I've seen it happen before." Marcus closed his eyes and felt the last piece of his faith in humanity shatter. How much would they want? For the kind of care your daughter needs? Probably $50,000 to $75,000 up front, maybe more. The irony was so bitter that Marcus almost laughed. He could buy the entire hospital if he wanted to, but because he was a black man in old clothes carrying a sick child, they would let Sophie die rather than risk treating someone who might not be able to pay. Dr. Santos called for an ambulance, but when the paramedics arrived and learned their destination was St. Mary's, their supervisor shook his head. "We can't transport without authorization from the receiving hospital. Sterling's been very clear about that policy." So Marcus found himself back where he had started, carrying Sophie through the automatic doors of St. Mary's emergency room for the second time in less than 2 hours. This time, her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that made his blood turn to ice. Dr. Sterling was still on duty, and when he saw Marcus approaching, his face twisted with annoyance and something darker. "I told you already. This is not the place for you people. How many times do I have to explain this before you understand?" "My daughter is dying," Marcus said, and for the first time in years, his voice carried the authority that had made him one of the most feared negotiators in corporate America. "She has sepsis, and she needs intensive care immediately. And I told you we don't provide charity care. Do you have $75,000 in cash? Because that's what it's going to cost to save your daughter's life." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Inside were credit cards that could cover any amount Sterling could name, but he knew it wouldn't matter. This wasn't about money. This was about the color of his skin and the assumptions that men like Sterling made about people who looked like him. "I can pay whatever you ask," Marcus said quietly. Sterling laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Really? You're going to pay $75,000? You?" He gestured at Marcus's clothes, his scuffed shoes, his 2-day stubble. "Sir, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know exactly what kind of people try to bluff their way into getting free medical care. Take your daughter to the county hospital where they have to treat people like you." That was when Dr. James Park stepped forward. At 28 years old, Park had been working as a resident in Sterling's department for 6 months, and he had seen enough to know that his supervising physician was not the man he pretended to be. Park was Korean-American, the son of immigrants who had cleaned office buildings to pay for his medical school, and he understood exactly what was happening. "Dr. Sterling," Park said, his voice steady despite the career suicide he was about to commit. "This child needs immediate medical attention. I don't care if her father can pay or not. We took an oath." Sterling's face flushed red. "Dr. Park, you are out of line. This is not your decision to make." "Then whose decision is it? When did we start deciding who lives and who dies based on the color of their skin or the clothes they wear?" The emergency room had gone completely silent. Nurses, orderlies, and other medical staff stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. Sarah Martinez, a 25-year-old nurse who had been working at St. Mary's for 3 years, felt her heart pounding as she realized she was witnessing something that would define the rest of her career. "Dr. Park," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "you are fired. Security will escort you out of this hospital immediately. And if you ever want to work in medicine again, you'll keep your mouth shut about this conversation." Park didn't back down. "Fire me if you want. But I'm not going to stand here and watch a child die because you think her father doesn't deserve basic human decency." Sterling turned to Sarah Martinez. "Nurse Martinez, call security and have Dr. Park removed from the premises. And if you say one word about this to anyone, you'll be joining him in the unemployment line." Sarah felt the weight of every person in the emergency room watching her. She thought about her own children at home, about the mortgage payment she had to make next week, about the nursing school loans she was still paying off. Then she looked at Sophie Johnson, unconscious in her father's arms, and made a choice that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. "Yes, Dr. Sterling," she whispered. Security guards appeared within minutes and escorted Dr. Park out of the hospital, while Marcus stood there holding his dying daughter, watching the one person who had tried to help them disappear into the night. The message was clear. Anyone who challenged Dr. Sterling's authority would be destroyed, and any patient who didn't meet his standards would be left to die. "Now," Sterling said, turning back to Marcus with satisfaction, "I believe I've made myself clear. This hospital is for people who can afford proper medical care. Take your daughter somewhere else." Marcus looked down at Sophie, at the necklace Amelia had given him resting against her small chest, and felt something fundamental change inside him. For 2 years, he had tried to honor his wife's memory by living humbly, by teaching their daughter that material possessions didn't define a person's worth. But humility in the face of evil wasn't virtue, it was complicity. Standing there in the emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital, holding his dying daughter, while a racist doctor smiled with satisfaction, Marcus Johnson made a decision that would change everything for everyone involved. He was done hiding. He was done pretending that living quietly would somehow protect his family from the hatred that people like Sterling carried in their hearts. It was time for Dr. Richard Sterling to learn exactly who he had just refused to treat. Marcus walked out of St. Mary's Hospital for the 2nd time that night, but this time he wasn't broken. This time, he was furious. Sophie's breathing was becoming more labored with each passing minute, and he knew that in a few more hours it might be too late for any hospital to save her life. The time for humility was over. Standing on the sidewalk outside the emergency room, Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "Jennifer, this is Marcus Johnson. I need David Thompson at St. Mary's Hospital within 30 minutes. I don't care if you have to drag him out of bed. Tell him it's a code-red emergency involving my daughter." Jennifer Walsh had been Marcus's executive assistant for 7 years, and she had never heard that tone in his voice before. "Mr. Johnson, should I call Dr. Morrison at Children's Hospital? We can have Sophie transported there in 15 minutes. "No," Marcus said, his voice hard as steel. "This ends here tonight. Get Thompson, get our legal team, and make sure every member of St. Mary's Board of Directors knows that the hospital's largest private donor is standing in their parking lot holding his dying daughter after being refused treatment." The second call went to Michael Chen, Johnson Holdings's head of security and investigation. "Michael, I need everything you can find on Dr. Richard Sterling, head of emergency medicine at St. Mary's Hospital. Employment history, disciplinary actions, complaints, lawsuits, everything. I need it in 20 minutes. While Marcus waited, he sat on a bench outside the hospital and held Sophie close, whispering to her about her mother. "Your mama was the strongest woman I ever knew, baby girl. She fought cancer for 2 years because she couldn't bear the thought of leaving us alone. She made me promise to protect you, and I failed tonight. But Daddy's going to fix this. I'm going to make sure no other little girl ever goes through what you're going through." Sophie's eyes fluttered open for just a moment, and she looked up at her father with the trust that only a child can have. "Daddy, I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart, but remember what Mama used to tell you? Sometimes we have to be brave, not just for ourselves, but for other people who need someone to stand up for them. Tonight, Daddy's going to be brave for you and for every other child who looks like us." Marcus gently touched the necklace around Sophie's neck, the one that had belonged to Amelia's grandmother, the woman who had been born into slavery, but died free. "This necklace has seen a lot of pain, Sophie, but it's also seen a lot of courage. Tonight, it's going to see justice." At 11:47 p.m., a convoy of black cars pulled into the St. Mary's Hospital parking lot. David Thompson, chairman of the hospital's board of directors, stepped out of the first vehicle, followed by 3 attorneys and 2 hospital administrators who had been pulled from their beds to deal with what Gut Jennifer Walsh had described as the most serious crisis in the hospital's history. Thompson was 65 years old, a man who had built his reputation on his ability to handle delicate situations with discretion and intelligence. He had served on corporate boards for 30 years, but he had never received a call like the one that had woken him up 20 minutes ago. "Marcus," Thompson said, as he approached the bench where Marcus sat holding Sophie. "I came as soon as I got your call. What's happening here?" Marcus stood up, and for the first time since entering the hospital, he spoke with the voice that had commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals. "David, 40 minutes ago, Dr. Richard Sterling, your head of emergency medicine, refused to treat my daughter because of the color of our skin. He told me this hospital wasn't for people like us, and suggested I take Sophie to the charity hospital." Thompson's face went white. "Marcus, that's impossible. There must be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Marcus said quietly. "Your Dr. Sterling made it very clear that black patients aren't welcome at St. Mary's Hospital unless they can prove they have $75,000 in cash up front." A crowd was beginning to gather. Nurses and orderlies on their break, patients' family members, and hospital staff who had heard about the commotion were starting to congregate in the parking lot. Marcus could see people taking photos with their phones, and he knew that within minutes this story would be spreading across social media. That was when Dr. Sterling made his fatal mistake. Seeing the crowd gathering and recognizing Thompson, he decided to come outside and take control of the situation before it spiraled out of hand. "Mr. Thompson," Sterling said as he approached, his white coat billowing in the night breeze, "I'm sorry you were disturbed for this. There's been a misunderstanding with a patient who was seeking charity care. I handled the situation according to hospital policy." Marcus turned to face Sterling, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had never been denied anything he truly wanted. "Dr. Sterling, my name is Marcus Johnson. I'm the CEO of Johnson Holdings, and I'm also the largest private donor to this hospital. 37 minutes ago, you refused to treat my daughter." The color drained from Sterling's face so quickly that Marcus thought the man might faint. Around them, the crowd was growing larger, and Marcus could hear whispers as people began to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. That's not possible," Sterling stammered. "You're lying. You can't be." "David," Marcus said, never taking his eyes off Sterling. "Please show Dr. Sterling the donor recognition plaque in the main lobby. The one that says Johnson Holdings, founding benefactor, $5 million donation for pediatric cancer research." Thompson nodded to one of his assistants, who immediately pulled out a tablet and began pulling up documentation. Within seconds, photos of the lobby plaque appeared on the screen, along with copies of donation receipts and board meeting minutes discussing Marcus's contributions to the hospital. "Dr. Sterling," Thompson said, his voice barely controlled, "is it true that you refused treatment to Mr. Johnson's daughter?" Sterling's mind was racing, trying to find a way out of the hole he had dug for himself. "Mr. Thompson, I was following standard protocols for uninsured patients. How was I supposed to know who he was? Look at the way he's dressed." The words hung in the air like a confession. Around them, the crowd had grown to more than 50 people, and Marcus could see hospital staff members pulling out their phones to record what was happening. "So you're saying," Marcus said quietly, "that you refused to treat my daughter not because she didn't need medical care, but because of the way I look and the clothes I wear?" That's not what I meant," Sterling said, but his voice was weak and unconvincing. That was when the people who had witnessed Sterling's behavior began to step forward. Dr. James Park, who had been fired less than an hour earlier, pushed through the crowd with a security guard trying to restrain him. "Mr. Thompson," Park called out, "I can testify to everything Mr. Johnson is saying. Dr. Sterling fired me for trying to treat his daughter, and he threatened Nurse Martinez when she tried to support me." Sarah Martinez, the young nurse who had been too scared to stand up to Sterling in the emergency room, found her courage in the crowd of witnesses. "It's true," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "Dr. Sterling said this hospital wasn't for people like them, and that we don't provide charity care to people who can't afford proper health care." Marcus looked around at the crowd, at the cameras recording everything, at David Thompson's horrified expression, and at Dr. Sterling's face as the man realized his career was ending in real time. But most of all, he looked down at Sophie, still unconscious in his arms, wearing her grandmother's necklace and fighting for her life, while the man who had refused to save her stood exposed before the world. "Dr. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the parking lot so that everyone could hear, "you asked me if I had $75,000 to pay for my daughter's care. Let me ask you a question. Do you have enough money to buy yourself a new career? Because after tonight, you're never going to practice medicine again." The confrontation in the St. Mary's Hospital parking lot had drawn a crowd of nearly 100 people, and Marcus Johnson stood at the center of it all, holding his sick daughter while facing down the man who had nearly cost Sophie her life. Cell phone cameras were recording from every angle, and Marcus knew that within hours this moment would be seen by millions of people around the world. Victoria Hayes, the State Director of Health Services, arrived just as the crowd reached its peak. Hayes was 60 years old, a woman who had spent her entire career fighting to ensure that medical care was provided without discrimination, and she had been called to the scene by a nurse who understood the gravity of what was happening. "I'm Dr. Victoria Hayes, State Director of Health Services," she announced as she made her way through the crowd. "I received an emergency report about this situation, and I'm here to investigate." Sterling tried to intercept her before she could reach Marcus. "Dr. Hayes, I'm Dr. Richard Sterling, Head of Emergency Medicine. There's been a misunderstanding here. This man is making false accusations about the quality of care we provide." Hayes ignored Sterling completely and walked directly to Marcus. "Mr. Johnson, I understand your daughter needs immediate medical attention. Can you tell me exactly what happened here tonight?" Marcus looked down at Sophie, who was barely conscious, then back at Dr. Hayes. 53 minutes ago, Dr. Sterling refused to treat my daughter because he decided that black patients weren't welcome at this hospital. He told me this facility wasn't for people like us and suggested I take her to the charity hospital instead. "That's a serious accusation," Hayes said. "Dr. Sterling, how do you respond to these charges?" Sterling's face was flushed, and sweat was beading on his forehead, despite the cool night air. "Dr. Hayes, I've been practicing medicine for 15 years. I've saved thousands of lives. One misunderstanding doesn't define my career. Is it true that you refused treatment to this child?" "I was following standard hospital protocols for uninsured patients," Sterling said, but his voice was growing more desperate. "We have procedures in place to determine payment before providing expensive treatments." Dr. Hayes turned to the crowd. "Was anyone here a witness to what happened tonight?" Dr. James Park stepped forward immediately. "I was there, Dr. Hayes. Dr. Sterling not only refused to treat Mr. Johnson's daughter, but he fired me when I tried to intervene. He made it clear that his decision was based on Mr. Johnson's race and appearance." Sarah Martinez found her voice again. "I can confirm Dr. Park's testimony. Dr. Sterling specifically said this hospital wasn't for people like them and threatened my job when I tried to support Dr. Park." 2 other nurses stepped forward with similar stories, and Marcus realized that Sterling's behavior tonight wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern that had been going on for years, hidden behind hospital policies and the silence of people who were too afraid to speak up. Hayes turned back to Sterling, and her voice was cold with professional anger. "Dr. Sterling, these are multiple witnesses testifying to the same discriminatory behavior. How do you explain that?" Sterling's composure finally cracked. "Look, Dr. Hayes, you don't understand what it's like working in emergency medicine. We get all kinds of people coming in here, demanding expensive treatments they can't pay for. We have to make difficult decisions about resource allocation." "Are you saying that the race of a patient factors into your medical decisions?" "I'm saying that we have to be practical about who we treat and how we allocate our resources," Sterling said, and Marcus could see that the man still didn't understand how his words sounded to everyone listening. Marcus stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every injustice he had ever experienced. "Dr. Sterling, you keep talking about resources and payment, but let me ask you something. When you see a black man in old clothes carrying a sick child, what goes through your mind?" "I don't see color," Sterling said automatically, the reflexive response of someone who had never honestly examined his own prejudices. "You don't see color?" Marcus repeated. "Then why did you assume I couldn't pay for my daughter's care? Why didn't you ask about insurance or payment options? Why did you immediately direct me to the charity hospital?" Sterling opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He was beginning to realize that every answer he gave was only making things worse. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "Dr. Sterling, 2 hours ago, you looked at my daughter and me, and you made a decision that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the color of our skin. You decided that we weren't worthy of the same care you would provide to a white family." "That's not true," Sterling protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then prove it," Marcus said. "Show me the written hospital policy that says uninsured patients should be directed to other facilities. Show me the guidelines that allow doctors to refuse emergency treatment to children based on their parents' ability to pay." David Thompson stepped forward with a tablet in his hands. "Dr. Sterling, I've just reviewed our hospital policies, and there is no protocol that allows emergency medical care to be denied to children based on insurance status or parental income. In fact, federal law requires that we provide emergency stabilization regardless of ability to pay." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Marcus could see people in the back standing on tiptoes to get a better view, and he realized this moment was about much more than his daughter's medical care. This was about every person of color who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong, every parent who had ever been told their child wasn't worth saving, every patient who had ever been judged by their appearance rather than their humanity. Sterling made one final desperate attempt to save his career. Fine, maybe I made a mistake in judgment, but this man deceived me. He came in here dressed like... Sterling gestured at Marcus's clothes, and in that gesture he revealed everything about his character that really mattered. Like what, Dr. Sterling? Marcus asked quietly. Like a black man. Like someone you assumed couldn't afford proper medical care. Like someone whose daughter's life was worth less than your assumptions about my bank account. Sterling's face contorted with rage and humiliation. Yes! All right, yes! When someone comes into my emergency room looking like you do, I make certain assumptions. That's just practical medicine. The silence that followed was deafening. In trying to defend himself, Sterling had just confessed to exactly the kind of racial discrimination that Marcus had accused him of. The crowd stood frozen, hardly believing they had just heard a doctor admit to judging patients based on their race. Dr. Hayes broke the silence. Dr. Sterling, you've just admitted to violating federal anti-discrimination laws, state medical ethics guidelines, and the basic principles of medical care. As State Director of Health Services, I'm placing you under formal investigation, and I'm recommending that your medical license be suspended immediately. Marcus looked down at Amelia's necklace around Sophie's neck, and he could almost hear his wife's voice telling him that this moment was why she had made him promise to fight. Not for revenge, but for justice. Not just for Sophie, but for every child who would come after her. Dr. Sterling, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the parking lot so that everyone could hear. My wife Amelia taught me that dignity doesn't come from the color of your skin or the money in your bank account. It comes from how you treat people who have no power to help you in return. Tonight, you showed everyone exactly what kind of man you are. And you did it to yourself. The crowd began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to a thunderous ovation that could be heard inside the hospital. Sterling stood in the center of it all, his career destroyed, his reputation in ruins, facing the consequences of a lifetime of prejudice that he had never bothered to examine or correct. But Marcus wasn't finished. There's one more thing, Dr. Sterling. You asked me if I had $75,000 to pay for my daughter's care. I want you to know that I'm donating $1 million to establish a fund that will ensure no child is ever denied emergency medical care at this hospital because of their parents' race or economic status. And I'm naming it the Amelia Johnson Memorial Fund for Equal Care, after my wife, who believed that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. As security guards escorted Sterling away from the hospital where he would never work again, Marcus finally allowed himself to feel something other than anger. Justice wasn't revenge. Justice was making sure that what happened to him and Sophie tonight would never happen to anyone else. 3 months after that fateful night at St. Mary's, Sophie Johnson is a healthy, happy 8-year-old with no memory of the moment when she almost lost her life. She wears her great-grandmother's necklace every day, not because she understands its historical significance, but because her father says it's a symbol of strength passed down through generations of resilient women. Marcus has returned to a simple life, taking his children to school in the morning, counting every penny to buy groceries in the afternoon. But he knows better than ever. There are battles no one wants to fight, but when faced and fought back, they define true courage. From his wife's memorial fund, a network of medical support for struggling families has spread across the state. The doctors and nurses who witnessed that night are now leading the charge to transform grief into systemic change. And more importantly, hundreds of families have been saved from despair by the courage of a father who refused to see his child disrespected. Every night, as Marcus looks up at the sky, he whispers to Amelia, "We did it. Sophie is safe, and we planted the seed that other children will be safe too." He knows the fight for justice is not over, but the most precious thing has returned. Hope. Hope that Sophie will grow up in a better world, where love is stronger than fear, where courage is contagious, and where ordinary people, when they stand up, can change the future.